Welcome, dear friends, to the Crimson Academy's course on the Fire Tablet. Dear friends, this will be an introduction to the Fire Tablet. To understand the Fire Tablet, it is essential to also know of the events and conditions regarding the state of the Baha'i Faith that preceded the time wherein Bahá'u'lláh revealed this famous document. The emotion expressed is so plaintive that the human station of Baha'u'lláh seems to dominate his soul, yet his divine station wells up with such reverence for God that a mystical intercourse between these two stations of his being produces a profound message for all Baha'is and those yet unborn. It is a message of victory, of steadfastness, and of great promise. The Fire Tablet's full title, taken from its opening lines, is Lawh-i-Qad-Ihtaraqa'l-Mukhlisun. The literal translation of this is Tablet of the Faithful Ones have burned, which the beloved guardian Shaykh Effendi translated as the hearts of the sincere are consumed in the fire of separation. The Fire Tablet is often recited by Baha'is at times of suffering and difficulties, and it was revealed when great afflictions and sorrows had surrounded Baha'u'lláh. However, many believers who are deeply moved by its tone often state that they do not entirely understand it. This celebrated tablet, therefore, deserves careful study with respect to its real and mystical implications. Dear friends, in the closing days of the exile of Baha'u'lláh and his followers in Adrianople, certain catastrophic events occurred within the fragile Baha'i community that deeply affected Baha'u'lláh. The divisiveness inculcated by Sayyid Muhammad that had begun earlier in Constantinople, which was in fact the cause of further exile to Adrianople, struck at the very heart of the embryonic faith established by Baha'u'lláh. Mirza Yahya, Baha'u'llah's half-brother, was a victim of his own vanity, probably due to the Bab's appointment of him as the nominal leader of his followers for reasons not pertaining to his capacities. Yahya developed an insatiable lust for power and recognition within the very community of Baha'is that Baha'u'lláh had so miraculously regenerated. It was during this time that the followers of the Bab, the herald and precursor of Baha'u'lláh, began to identify themselves as Baha'is rather than Babis. Dear friends, for the purpose of reviewing the Fire Tablet, it is important to appreciate the depth of the extraordinary phenomenon of regeneration that occurred in an earlier time of the first exile to Baghdad after Baha'u'llah's terrible incarceration in the Siyah-Chal, the dark pit of Tehran. Indeed, this phenomenon would recur on a greater scale in his fourth and final exile to his hospitable prison city of Akká. In each instance of repression experienced by the fledgling Babi community, it was the resplendent figure of Baha'u'lláh that would inspire them and ultimately the world through numerous tablets that were revealed even during the time of his own severe duress. The cowardice Yahya exhibited innumerable times going back to the Baghdad exile now turned into arrogance under the influence of the Antichrist of the Baha'i dispensation, Sayyid Muhammad. A pattern of insurrection unfolded that culminated in an attempt on the life of a divine messenger of God. Baha'u'lláh had always protected and nurtured his half-brother, and for him to turn on Baha'u'lláh in this way was heart-rending. Moreover, Yahya rent so deep a schism on the most basic tenet of the faith, the principle of unity, that would prove to be the most damaging thing that Baha'u'lláh would ever face in spite of great personal and physical ordeals exacted by outside enemies of the faith. The machinations of Sayyid Muhammad and Mirza Yahya provoked such consternation with the Turkish authorities that a further final exile was ordered to the prison city of Akká, Palestine. Ultimately, the party was divided. One group would go with Baha'u'lláh to Akká, and the other group would go with Mirza Yahya to Cyprus. On August 31st, 1868, Baha'u'lláh and 70 followers arrived at the most great prison, Akká. Unfortunately, some followers of Yahya were put in the group with Baha'u'lláh, including Sayyid Muhammad, and 4 followers of Baha'u'lláh were put in the group with Yahya. This was most distressing for the followers, for whom separation from their beloved was unbearable. For Baha'u'lláh, Abdul Baha, and the Baha'is, the presence of Sayyid Muhammad would provide endless torment during the early years in Akká. One loyal follower actually attempted suicide to avoid separation from his beloved. Conditions in the prison were harsh and very unhealthy, so much so that 3 persons died while suffering extreme fever. All the prisoners were subjected to strict confinement by their captors. But the worst aspect of life in the barracks was brought on by the covenant breakers. The Sayyid and 3 others campaigned with lies to defame Baha'u'lláh. Then they colluded with the authorities to prevent the pilgrims, some of whom traveled great distances on foot, from seeing or even communicating with him. This meant that the persecuted believers in Persia were left bereft of guidance from their Lord. Indeed, many did not know whether he was alive or dead. Then something happened that utterly devastated Baha'u'lláh and his family. The beloved guardian Shaykh Effendi describes this event. To the galling weight of these tribulations was now added the bitter grief of a sudden tragedy, the premature loss of the noble, the pious Mirza Mehdi, the purest branch. Abdu'l-Baha's 22-year-old brother, an amanuensis of Baha'u'lláh, and the companion of his exile from the days when as a child he was brought from Tehran to Baghdad to join his father after his return from Sulaymaniyeh. He was pacing the roof of the barracks in the twilight. One evening, wrapped in his customary devotions, when he fell through the unguarded skylight onto a wooden crate standing on the floor beneath, which pierced his ribs and caused 22 hours later his death. On the 23rd of Rabiul-Awwal, 1287 AH, June 23rd, 1870. His dying supplication to a grieving father was that his life might be accepted as a ransom for those who were prevented from attaining the presence of their beloved. This poignant episode provides the clearest example of the great suffering endured by Baha'u'lláh throughout his long ministry. Baha'u'lláh revealed a prayer in memory of his son that is reminiscent of Abraham's intended sacrifice of his son. Glorified art thou, O Lord my God. Thou seest me in the hands of mine enemies, and my son blood-stained before thy face. O thou in whose hands is the kingdom of all names. I have, O my Lord, offered up that which thou hast given me, that thy servants may be quickened, and all that dwell on earth be united. Dear friends, it must be noted that Baha'u'lláh, having the power of life and death, suffered an enormous sacrifice by acquiescing to his son's wish to ransom his life for the opening of the gates of the prison. Upon reviewing the dispensations of the past, it becomes readily apparent that all divine messengers suffered greatly in various ways, simply because they were bringing the teachings of God to mankind. It appears that Baha'u'lláh, perhaps because of his longevity and because of the scope of his revelation, seemed to bear an inordinate burden throughout his earthly life. In a tablet, he encapsulates this phenomena while identifying himself with the messengers of the past. At one time thou didst deliver me into the hands of Nimrod. At another thou hast allowed Pharaoh's rod to persecute me. Thou alone canst estimate, through thine all-encompassing knowledge and the operation of thy will, the incalculable afflictions I have suffered at their hands. Again thou didst cast me into the prison cell of the ungodly for no reason, except that I was moved to whisper into the ears of the well-favored denizens of thy kingdom an intimation of the vision with which thou hadst, through thy knowledge, inspired me and revealed to me its meaning through the potency of thy might. And again, thou didst decree that I be beheaded by the sword of the infidel. Again, I was crucified for having unveiled to man's eyes the hidden gems of thy glorious unity, for having revealed to them the wondrous signs of thy sovereign and everlasting power. How bitter the humiliations heaped upon me in a subsequent age on the plain of Karbala! How lonely did I feel amidst thy people! To what state of helplessness I was reduced in that land! Unsatisfied with such indignities, my persecutors decapitated me and carried aloft my head from land to land, paraded it before the gaze of the unbelieving multitude, and deposited on the seats of the perverse and faithless. In a later age I was suspended, and my breast was made a target to the darts of the malicious cruelty of my foes. My limbs were riddled with bullets, and my body was torn asunder. Finally, behold, how in this day my treacherous enemies have leagued themselves against me, and are continually plotting to instill the venom of hate and malice into the souls of thy servants. With all their might they are scheming to accomplish their purpose. It was in this milieu of despair, tragedy, and torment that Baha'u'lláh revealed the Lawh-i-Qad-Ihtaraqa'l-Mukhlisun, or the Fire Tablet, as it is known in the West. The tablet was revealed in 1871 for a young devoted follower named Haji Sayyid Ali Akbar. Dear friends, it may be studied in three parts. Baha'u'lláh, in his human station, describes conditions of abject sorrow followed by invocations to God pertinent to those conditions in such poignant terms that it is reminiscent of the plaintive call by Christ during his crucifixion when he asked, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" Then he reverently addresses God by his attributes. God, speaking through his messenger, answers the call of Baha'u'lláh with omnipotent authority, explaining why such conditions exist, and then addresses him in most endearing terms. The call of God is answered by Baha'u'lláh in the station of a divine messenger in a most provocative way, bursting through the ashes of despair like a phoenix rising with the triumph of sacrifice. Dear friends, I've attempted to associate specific conditions with each invocation. There were many incidents feeding one into another which occurred over a number of years that were related to this tablet, and only a few are represented here. The Surah Mullah, the Surah of the Kings, contains some elements of Baha'u'llah's experience prior to his banishment to the most great prison that influenced the writings of the Fire Tablet. Dear friends, this famous tablet expresses, in a sense, the culmination or summary of emotions and the truths associated with the tribulations experienced by His Holiness Baha'u'lláh and his company for a period that spanned 19 years. All of this has since been transformed miraculously into ultimate victory for his cause. Despair and invocation. Baha'u'lláh begins by addressing God in terms of ultimate respect for his position, such as the first cause and the supreme being. In the name of God, the most ancient, the most great. He then begins his plaintive calls. Indeed, the hearts of the sincere are consumed in the fire of separation. Where is the gleaming of the light of thy countenance, O beloved of the worlds? This refers to the heart-wrenching fact that the closest the followers of Baha'u'lláh could approach was the city gate of Akká, and then only his hand would be visible waving in the distance. Within the prison, forced separation between members in his company created a sense of isolation, and they began to feel spiritually bereft, deprived of the resplendent presence of His Holiness Baha'u'lláh. Some were expelled from Akká due to the machinations of Sayyid Muhammad. Separation, the opposite of unity, was perhaps the most grievous of any condition experienced by the Babis, who would soon be called Baha'is. The beloved guardian quotes Agha Kalim on the occasion of the final rupture between Baha'u'lláh and Mirza Yahya in Adrianople. All the companions lamented in their separation from the Blessed Beauty. Those days is the written testimony of one of those companions, were marked by tumult and confusion. We were sore perplexed and greatly feared lest we be permanently deprived of the bounty of his presence. Again he calls, those who are near unto thee have been abandoned in the darkness of desolation. Where is the shining of the morn of thy reunion, O desire of the worlds? Here, dear friends, Baha'u'lláh is relating to the conditions in Akká which were abominable. Also, the authorities were required to treat the believers harshly, while others had been forced to remain behind along the path of exile. Baha'u'lláh continues, he cries out, the bodies of thy chosen ones lie quivering on distant sands. Where is the ocean of thy presence, O enchanter of the worlds? Dear friends, here Baha'u'lláh speaks about the remnants of the Baha'i community, which remained devastated in their homeland and thirsted for spiritual guidance, and a few of whom were forced to travel to the island of Cyprus with the arch enemy of the faith, Mirza Yahya. Earlier, when the exiles were still in Adrianople, ominous events began to occur. The beloved guardian Shaykh Effendi describes the events that transpired. Emboldened by the recent ordeals with which Baha'u'lláh had been so cruelly afflicted, these enemies, who had been momentarily quiescent, began to demonstrate afresh and in a number of ways the latent animosity they nursed in their hearts. A persecution varying in the degree of its severity began once more to break out in various countries. In Azerbaijan and Zanjan, in Nishapur and Tehran, the adherents of the faith were either imprisoned, vilified, penalized, tortured, or put to death. Among the sufferers may be singled out the intrepid Najaf Aliyeh Zanjani, a survivor of the struggle of Zanjan, and immortalized in the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, who, bequeathing the gold in his possession to his executioner, was heard to shout aloud, Ya Rabi'ul-Apha, before he was beheaded. In Egypt, a greedy and vicious consul general extorted no less than 100,000 tumans from a wealthy Persian convert named Haji Abul Qasim Shirazi, arrested Haji Mirza Haydar Ali and 6 of his fellow believers, and instigated their condemnation to a 9-year exile in Khartoum, confiscating all the writings in their possession, and then threw into prison Nabil, whom Baha'u'lláh had sent to appeal to the Khedive on their behalf. In Baghdad and Qazimain, indefatigable enemies, watching their opportunity, subjected Baha'u'llah's faithful supporters to harsh and ignominious treatment, savagely disemboweled Abdur Rasul Qulumi as he was carrying water in his skin at the hour of dawn from the river to the most great house, and banished amidst scenes of public derision about 70 companions to Mosul, including women and children. Then His Holiness Baha'u'lláh laments, longing hands are uplifted to the heaven of thy grace and generosity. Where are the rains of thy bestowal, O Answerer of the worlds? Here, dear friends, despair had gripped the company of Baha'u'lláh, and many felt that they were near the end of their endurance. Again Baha'u'lláh cries, the infidels have arisen in tyranny on every hand. Where is the compelling power of thine ordaining pen, O conqueror of the worlds? Here, friends, unbelievers in very high places of power across the Ottoman Empire had colluded to destroy the infant faith promulgated by Baha'u'lláh by imposing unbearable conditions upon his followers. Repression extended throughout the realm as well. In the gleanings from the writings of Baha'u'lláh, Baha'u'lláh writes, 20 years have passed, O kings, during which we have each day tasted the agony of a fresh tribulation. No one of them that were before us hath endured the things we have endured. Would that ye could perceive it. They that rose up against us have put us to death, have shed our blood, have plundered our property, and violated our honor. Though aware of most of our afflictions, ye, nevertheless, have failed to stay the hand of the aggressor. For is it not your clear duty to restrain the tyranny of the oppressor, and to deal equitably with your subjects, that your high sense of justice may be fully demonstrated to all mankind? His Holiness Baha'u'lláh explains, the barking of dogs is loud on every side. Where is the lion of the forest of thy might, O chastiser of the worlds? This multiple metaphor includes a follower, Mirza Razi Quli, who had been dismissed by Baha'u'lláh after disgracing the faith by committing shameful deeds. He joined forces with his sister Badri John, Mirza Yahya, and Sayyid Muhammad in a campaign of calumnies against Baha'u'lláh. Their efforts were so devastating that the citizens of Akká began to show enmity and malice toward the believers. All of them were as barking dogs. He includes the world in his lament. Coldness, coldness have gripped all mankind. Where is the warmth of thy love, O fire of the worlds? Here, Baha'u'lláh talks about the pain. The pain that Baha'u'lláh is bearing at this time is exacerbated by events far beyond the most great prison. The corruption and perversion of religion in Persia and Turkey were always of deep concern to Baha'u'lláh, both with regard to his followers and ultimately to the populace in general. He then exclaims, calamity hath reached its height. Where are the signs of thy succor, O salvation of the worlds? Sedition caused by the Azalis had reached a fevered pitch. The venom of their hostility had endangered the very life of Baha'u'lláh. Yet he admonished his small company to be patient and forbearing. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh continues and expresses deep concern. He states, darkness hath enveloped most of the peoples. Where is the brightness of thy splendor, O radiance of the worlds? Though a few were still steadfast in their faith, the spiritual light in most countries was flickering out in a sea of disbelief. This condition is clarified when he addresses the rulers in Constantinople. Baha'u'lláh states, "We behold in thee the foolish ruling over the wise, and darkness vaunting itself against the light. Thou art indeed filled with manifest pride. Hath thine outward splendor made thee vainglorious? By him who is the Lord of mankind, each shall soon perish, and thy daughters and thy widows and all the kindreds that dwell within thee shall lament. Thus informeth thee the all-knowing, the all-wise." The pattern continues. He rephrases exclamatory statements of despair, followed by variations of his questions. These are repeated in cadence as he appeals to God with exalted titles and attributes. The necks of men are stretched out in malice. Where are the swords of thy vengeance, O destroyer of the worlds? Only God can wreak vengeance. Baha'u'lláh constantly restrained his followers against punishing the oppressors of the faith. Whenever they went against his will, tragedy followed. Abasement have reached its lowest depth. Where are the emblems of thy glory, O glory of the worlds? Here, friends, there are two conditions of abasement referred to by Baha'u'lláh. One is related to himself, and the other to the people and rulers. The first is actually of greater importance because it concerns the abasement that was forced upon the person of Baha'u'lláh, an abasement which he considered to be his glory. Sorrows have afflicted the revealer of thy name, the All-Merciful. Where is the joy of the dayspring of thy revelation, O delight of the worlds? The beloved guardian identifies the rebellion of Mirza Yahya as the greatest source of sorrow for Baha'u'lláh. The supreme crises Baha'u'lláh himself designated as the Ayyum Shiddat, days of stress, during which the most grievous veil was torn asunder, and the most great separation was irrevocably effected. It immensely gratified and emboldened its external enemies, both civil and ecclesiastical, played into their hands and evoked their unconcealed derision. It perplexed and confused the friends and supporters of Baha'u'lláh, and seriously damaged the prestige of the faith in the eyes of its Western admirers. It had been brewing ever since the early days of Baha'u'llah's sojourn in Baghdad, was temporarily suppressed by the creative forces which, under his as yet unproclaimed leadership, reanimated a disintegrating community and finally broke out in all its violence in the years immediately preceding the proclamation of his message. It brought incalculable sorrow to Baha'u'lláh, visibly aged him, and inflicted through its repercussions the heaviest blow ever sustained by him in his lifetime. Anguish hath befallen all the peoples of the earth. Where are the ensigns of thy gladness, O joy of the worlds? Here, dear friends, militant materialism had taken the reins of power in Europe and would threaten peace far beyond that continent. In the Orient, a despotic empire centered in Constantinople brought unbearable pressure on the faith that was destined to save mankind from its spiritual self destruction. Thou seest the dawning place of thy signs, veiled by evil suggestions. Where are the fingers of thy might, O power of the worlds? Sayyid Muhammad and Agha Jan wrote anonymous letters which perverted the writings of Baha'u'lláh and which accused him of having conspired with Bulgarian leaders and certain ministers of European powers to achieve, with the help of some thousands of his followers, the conquest of Constantinople. Government officials were alarmed by this and determined to isolate His Holiness Baha'u'lláh and reduce him to powerlessness. He was in seclusion during these events. In a broader sense, His Holiness Baha'u'lláh makes mention, "My face hath come forth from the veils and shed its radiance upon all that is in heaven and on earth. And yet ye turn not towards him, notwithstanding that ye were created for him, O conquerors of kings. Sore thirst hath overcome all men. Where is the river of thy bounty, O mercy of the worlds?" A spiritual vacuum permeated the world that left humans in a state of confusion beyond their own awareness of understanding. Greed hath made captive all mankind. Where are the embodiments of detachment, O Lord of the worlds? Lust for power, corruption at all levels of society, gluttony for wealth, and an insatiable appetite for prestige or fame had brought what was once the most civilized of nations to the lowest level of spiritual poverty. The kings of the earth are admonished for what they pride themselves in, especially ornaments and treasuries. Thou seest this wronged one, lonely in exile. Where are the hosts of the heaven of thy command, O sovereign of the worlds? The beloved guardian Shoghi Effendi describes the restrictions imposed on His Holiness Baha'u'lláh and his family. Explicit orders had been issued by the Sultan and his ministers to subject the exiles who were accused of having grievously erred and led others far astray to the strictest confinement. Hopes were confidently expressed that the sentence of lifelong imprisonment pronounced against them would lead to their eventual extermination. The Farman of Sultan Abdul Aziz, dated the 5th of Rabi'a Thani, 1285 AH, July 26, 1868, not only condemned them to perpetual banishment, but stipulated their strict incarceration and forbade them to associate either with each other or with the local inhabitants. I have been forsaken in a foreign land. Where are the emblems of thy faithfulness, O trust of the worlds? Here Baha'u'lláh, in his human station of the wronged one, is desirous of a sign of reassurance. The agonies of death have laid hold on all men. Where is the surging of thine ocean of eternal life? O life of the worlds! Here Baha'u'lláh is deeply disturbed by the spiritual sickness of mankind. The whisperings of Satan have been breathed to every creature. Where is the meteor of thy fire, O light of the worlds? The divisiveness caused by Mirza Yahya was so devastating that it seemed to permeate the whole world. The beloved guardian Shoghi Effendi explains. It was engineered throughout by the tortuous intrigues and incessant machinations of that same diabolical Sayyid Muhammad, that vile whisperer who, disregarding His Holiness Baha'u'llah's advice, had insisted on accompanying him to Constantinople and Adrianople, and was now redoubling his efforts with unrelaxing vigilance to bring it to a head. The drunkenness of passion hath perverted most of mankind. Where are the daysprings of purity, O desire of the worlds? Here greed, zeal for fame, and lust for power on the part of the bulk of mankind lay at the root of the problems facing the early Baha'is, both in the immediate vicinity of Akká and in the Ottoman Empire as a whole. In the Kitab Aqdas, His Holiness Baha'u'lláh asks the people of Constantinople, hath the drunkenness of passion laid hold upon you? Or is it that ye are sunk in heedlessness? O spot that art situate on the shores of the two seas, the throne of tyranny hath verily been established upon thee, and the flame of hatred hath been kindled within thy bosom. Thou seest this wronged one, veiled in tyranny among the Syrians. Where is the radiance of thy dawning light, O light of the worlds? Here, dear friends, the dawning light emanating from those lands that had been introduced to the faith by early believers, first in Persia, then Iraq, and Turkey, added to them during Baha'u'llah's sojourn in Adrianople, where the Caucasus and Syria. Nabil had converted a number of those early pioneers. Akká was part of the province of Syria. Thou seest me forbidden to speak forth. Then from where will spring thy melodies, O nightingale of the worlds? Baha'u'lláh has now withdrawn from all contact with others. Most of the people are enwrapped in fancy and idle imaginings. Where are the exponents of thy certitude, O assurance of the worlds? His Holiness Baha'u'lláh addressed the kings of Christendom in no uncertain terms when he questioned them about the sayings of Jesus regarding the many signs of the Christ's return. When he, the Spirit of truth, is come, he will guide you unto all truth. And yet behold how, when he did bring the truth, ye refused to turn your faces towards him, and persisted in disporting yourselves with your pastimes and fancies. Baha is drowning in a sea of tribulation. Where is the ark of thy salvation, O Saviour of the worlds? The beloved guardian Shoghi Effendi describes a fresh danger that clearly threatened the life of Baha'u'lláh. Though he himself had stringently forbidden his followers on several occasions, both verbally and in writing, any retaliatory acts against their tormentors, and had even sent back to Beirut an irresponsible Arab convert who had meditated avenging the wrong suffered by his beloved leader. 7 of the companions clandestinely sought out and slew 3 of their persecutors, among whom were Sayyid Muhammad and Agha Jan. The consternation that seized an already oppressed community was indescribable. His Holiness Baha'u'llah's indignation knew no bounds. After this horrendous act, even the children of the imprisoned exiles, whenever they ventured to show themselves in the streets during those days, would be pursued, vilified, and pelted with stones. The cup of His Holiness Baha'u'llah's tribulations was now filled to overflowing. If we pause a moment and visualize a vast reservoir that may be likened to the great capacity that Baha'u'lláh possessed for sensitivity, compassion, love, and suffering, we can sense the enormous despair that befell him after 19 long years of relentless attack from without and from within the embryonic community of believers. That reservoir of pain had been fed by rivers and streams of tribulation flowing in from every direction, beginning with his incarceration in the Black Pit of Tehran in August 1852. The level of duress had finally reached its capacity and began flooding over the dam until it literally broke and released a cataract of power and emotion that became this, the fire tablet. Thou seest the dayspring of thine utterance in the darkness of creation. Where is the sun of the heaven of thy grace, O light giver of the worlds? Jealousy became one of the motivating factors in the multifarious complicities purportedly involving Baha'u'lláh. Mirza Hussein Khan, the Mushro Dawla, and his associates arose to take full advantage of the recent troubles that had been experienced by Baha'u'lláh and to assure his destruction. In Constantinople, the esteem shown Baha'u'lláh by the governor Muhammad Pasha Qibrisi and his successors incensed the authorities. Aware of the instabilities prevailing in their own countries, they were disturbed by the constant comings and goings of pilgrims in Adrianople and by the exaggerated reports of Fuad Pasha. They were further provoked by petitions of Mirza Yahya that reached them through his agent Sayyid Muhammad. The lamps of truth and purity, of loyalty and honor have been put out. Where are the signs of thine avenging wrath, O mover of the worlds? Here, dear friends, when Baha'u'lláh went into seclusion after the rebellion of Mirza Yahya, he found even more perplexities resulting from the collusion of Sayyid Muhammad and Mirza Yahya. They had written columnist letters about Baha'u'lláh and had them disseminated in Persia and Iraq. They also wrote petitions couched in obsequious language and sent them to the governor of Adrianople. Mirza Yahya then dispatched one of his wives to the government house to complain that her husband had been cheated out of his rights and that her children were on the verge of starvation. Meanwhile, Sayyid Muhammad had journeyed to the capital and speaking to the Persian ambassador, accused His Holiness Baha'u'lláh of sending an agent to assassinate Nasruddin Shah. Canst thou see any who have championed thyself, or who ponder on what hath befallen him in the pathway of thy love? Now doth my pen halt, O beloved of the worlds. Consternation within the mind of His Holiness Baha'u'lláh has now reached its zenith. It is reminiscent of Lot, who long ago tried to save the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, but failed in his attempt to identify people of virtue. But with His Holiness Baha'u'lláh, there were such individuals. The branches of the divine Lot tree lie broken by the onrushing gales of destiny. Where are the banners of thy succor, O champion of the worlds? Here, dear friends, the human side of His Holiness Baha'u'lláh had become utterly devastated by events. He is likened to a lot tree that in ancient times was planted at the end of a road beyond which there is no passing. This face is hidden in the dust of slander. Where are the breezes of thy compassion, O mercy of the worlds? Regarding Mirza Yahya, His Holiness Baha'u'lláh admonishes, Thou hast perpetrated against thy brother what no man hath perpetrated against another. What hath proceeded from thy pen hath caused the countenances of glory to be prostrated upon the dust, hath rent in twain the veil of grandeur in the sublime paradise, and lacerated the hearts of the favored ones established upon the loftiest seats. The robe of sanctity is sullied by the people of deceit. Where is the vesture of thy holiness, O adorner of the worlds? Sayyid Muhammad, Agha Jan, and Mirza Reza Quli indulge in a campaign of abuse, calumny, and intrigue against Baha'u'lláh, which exceeded that of the campaign launched in Constantinople earlier by Sayyid Muhammad, the Antichrist of the Baha'i Faith. The sea of grace is stilled for what the hands of man hath wrought. Where are the waves of thy bounty, O desire of the worlds? The manner in which the prisoners were treated from the first days in Akká had remained so egregious, so flagrantly abusive under abominable conditions, that it was designated the most great prison. Worse, Baha'u'lláh was isolated in the prison. Later he would withdraw for the sake of unity. The door leading to the divine presence is locked through the tyranny of thy foes. Where is the key of thy bestowal, O unlocker of the worlds? Periodically, the evil machinations conducted by the foes of the faith from within produce such intractable divisiveness that His Holiness Baha'u'lláh would withdraw into solitude for a time. Dear friends, this occurred in Baghdad, Adrianople, and finally in Akká. The leaves are yellowed by the poisoning winds of sedition. Where is the downpour of the clouds of thy bounty, O Giver of the worlds? The insidious, relentless acts of deceit and subversion by Sayyid Muhammad and his cohorts had affected the friends of the faith in negative ways and had bolstered its enemies. The universe is darkened with the dust of sin. Where are the breezes of thy forgiveness, O Forgiver of the worlds? Dear friends, the devastating impact of Mirza Yahya's rebellion was so significant that it overwhelmed the infant faith for a time. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh expands his lamentation to include all of the spiritual reality of man. This youth is lonely in a desolate land. Where is the rain of thy heavenly grace, O bestower of the worlds? In his seclusion, His Holiness Baha'u'lláh was utterly alone, and he had to bear this in order to eventually restore unity in the Baha'i community. Among the foregoing, Baha'u'lláh has, in a spiritual sense, referred to extreme cold, calamity, the wicked stirs of sedition, confinement of prisoners, loneliness, banishment, abasement, affliction, and hearts full of hate. God now answers His Holiness Baha'u'lláh in most endearing terms. O Supreme Pen, we have heard thy most sweet call in the eternal realm. Give thou ear unto what the tongue of grandeur uttereth, O wronged one of the worlds. Here, one by one, he answers the questions that had been put to him by Baha'u'lláh. Were it not for the cold, how would the heat of thy words prevail, O expounder of the worlds? Were it not for calamity, how would the sun of thy patience shine, O light of the worlds? Lament not because of the wicked. Thou wert created to bear and endure, O patience of the worlds. How sweet was thy dawning on the horizon of the covenant among the stirs of sedition, and thy yearning after God, O love of the worlds. By thee the banner of independence was planted on the highest peaks, and the sea of bounty surged, O rapture of the worlds. By thine aloneness the sun of oneness shone, and by thy banishment the land of unity was adorned. Be patient, O thou exile of the worlds. We have made abasement the garment of glory, and affliction the adornment of thy temple, O pride of the worlds. Thou seest the hearts are filled with hate, and to overlook is thine, O thou concealer of the sins of the worlds. When the swords flash, go forward. When the shafts fly, press onward, O thou sacrifice of the worlds. Dost thou wail, or shall I wail? Rather shall I weep at the fewness of thy champions, O thou who hast caused the wailing of the worlds. Here Baha'u'lláh, speaking now as a divine messenger, responds to the admonitions of God. Verily I have heard thy call, O all glorious beloved, and now is the face of Baha flaming with the heat of tribulation and with the fire of thy shining word, and he hath risen up in faithfulness at the place of sacrifice, looking toward thy pleasure, O ordainer of the worlds. Then, as Baha'u'lláh addresses the recipient of this potent tablet, we may also consider that he is addressing the Baha'is of the world. O Ali Akbar, thank thy Lord for this tablet, whence thou canst breathe the fragrance of my meekness, and know what hath beset us in the path of God, the adored of all the worlds. And dear friends, finally is his confirming certitude. Should all the servants read and ponder this, there shall be kindled in their veins a fire that shall set aflame the world. Baha'u'lláh.